Hi, this is Chris Young, and welcome to a very special episode of Contemplating Life. Each year, an organization called PATINS, Promoting Achievement Through Technology and Instruction for All Students, holds their annual Tech Expo. They invite in vendors and providers from all sorts of assistive technology and education providers to display their latest items, and there are also a number of speakers. For the second year in a row, I've been involved in a presentation put on by AT makers, or Assistive Technology makers, along with my friend Bill Benko. This year my topic was Assistive Technology, Gateway to Disability Rights. Now normally my podcasts are only a half hour long, but this presentation was an hour long, so you're going to get a double episode, and then we'll take next week off to give me a break and get caught up on some writing. I encourage you to watch the YouTube version if you can, because there is a PowerPoint slideshow that goes with it. For the audio-only version, I'm going to provide description of the slides, especially if there's anyone who's visually impaired and would like an audio description. Also, let me add that I was mic'd up and Bill wasn't, and so it's hard to hear him some places. I tried to boost the audio when he was talking, but while he was talking, I was trying to catch my breath and trying to clear my throat. So you're going to hear a lot of annoying grunting noises from me while Bill is speaking. I apologize for that. Again, the YouTube version, I put some captions on his part, so it's a little easier to understand what he's saying. In the presentation on the slideshow, there were a number of QR codes. I'm going to put those links in the description, along with a bunch of other links that we didn't have QR codes for. So whether you watch it on YouTube or whether you're listening, be sure to check out the complete list of links in the description to this week's podcast, because there's a lot more information. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's a little departure from what we've been doing. Next week we'll resume my continuing series on my experiences in a special education school. So for now, enjoy the show. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming out. Today's presentation called Assistive Technology, Gateway to Disability Rights. And I'm Chris Young, and I'm assisted here today with my friend Bill Benko. I volunteer for Bill's charity, atmakers.org. Some of you may have been here last year at the Technology Expo, where Bill and I gave a presentation about the work that we do. And we focus on our experiences creating custom assistive technology for when off-the-shelf solutions don't work. And so last year's presentation is available on YouTube, and we've got QR codes on the screens, and the presentation is all on the downloadable materials, so you can get these QR codes. And I'm also recording today, so we'll be putting a video up of today's presentation. You can check that out later if you want to. The presentation this year isn't going to be so much about practical ways to meet AT needs of your clients. Rather, we're going to take a different way of looking at AT. It's more about a philosophy of AT is about, and it's going to give you some ideas you might not have thought about. So let me give you a little background about me. I'm 67 years old, and I was born with a genetic neuromuscular disease called spinal muscular atrophy type 2, or SMA for short. I never walked when I was young. My parents carried me around until I was about 5 years old, and that's when I got my first wheelchair. And then at age 10, I got my first power wheelchair. And I attended an all special ed school here in Indianapolis, and then went on to Northwest High School, and then I earned a BS degree from IUPUI. I keep busy these days developing AT solutions and doing freelance writing, and I recently started my own podcast, and I'll put in a plug for that a little bit later. I want to say we don't have any financial interest in today's talk. My podcast is free, so I'm not, even though I'm plugging it, I'm not going to get rich off of that. And now you can support me on Patreon if you want, but that's voluntary. And I'm also going to be recommending a book today, and let me say I don't know the author, and I don't have any interest in that book except it's a great book. So, I've always had two great disability-related passions in my life. One was to work as a disability advocate, and the other was to create assistive technology. And I can trace my passion for both of these things to my late parents. My mother was very active in disability advocacy from the time I was very young. And as I grew to adulthood, I joined her in those activities. We did a lot of lobbying at the state legislature and the Indiana State Building Council. When they were revising the building codes for accessibility, we would go to those hearings. And we served on the board of directors of a couple of different disability-related organizations. My dad was a great tinkerer. He could build anything, and he built all sorts of adaptive equipment and assistive technology for me. And once I got into hobby electronics, then anytime I could design something or draw him up a schematic, he would wire it up for me. So really these passions are rooted in the work of my parents and the things that they did for me. Now, having worked in these areas all my life, I didn't really think about the interaction between the two, besides the fact that they're both disability related. And all that changed last November when I read this book. It's called Disability Pride, Dispatches from a Post-ADA World by journalist Ben Matlin. And I really want to highly recommend you check out this book. It's available on Amazon. It's an audio book, a Kindle book, a hardcover, whatever. And the author is a freelance journalist for a number of websites, and I think this is his third book. And like me, he's in his 60s, and he has SMA type 2. So in the book, he recounts the history of disability advocacy. I learned some really fascinating things that I didn't know before. For example, in 1924, 20,000 World War I veterans, many of them disabled. Did my mic just go out?
Yes.
A few moments later.
Okay. So 20,000 World War I veterans, and a lot of them were disabled, marched on Washington demanding benefits they had been promised and were denied. So that was one of the first areas of disability advocacy. Also, I didn't know that Depression-era government programs like the WPA expressly forbid hiring any workers with any kind of disability. And that brought together advocates to get that changed. And eventually that all changed in 1939 when they reversed that policy. So the book recounts the struggle to secure the passage of the Americans with Disability Act. And that was really a landmark in disability advocacy. And then he goes on to describe all the things that happened post-ADA, which that's the majority of the book. People say, well, now that you got your ADA and you got your rights, what else is there to do? Well, there's still quite a bit to do because ADA doesn't cover everything. People don't always follow it, even though it's the law. And sometimes you have to go to court to get these things resolved. But for me, the most interesting part of this account was when he credited a particular invention as having kick-started the whole disability movement. And he made this connection between disability rights and assistive technology that I never noticed. Go ahead. He tells that in 1937, an engineer named Harry Jennings built a wheelchair for his friend Herbert Everest, who had been paralyzed in a mining accident. And together they founded the famous Everest and Jennings Wheelchair Company. And the E&J wheelchair was the first folding, lightweight, tubular steel wheelchair. Prior to that, wheelchairs were typically ordinary wooden wicker chairs with just wheels stuck on. And you can see the evolution of the wheelchair in these photos. The older wheelchairs were wooden, they were cumbersome, and most importantly, they couldn't be folded up to put in the back seat of your car or your trunk. So the old wheelchairs would get you around the house and out to the front porch, and there, if you're lucky, maybe a neighbor would walk by and wave at you or stop and talk to you. You might not even bother to build a wheelchair ramp to get off that porch, because where are you going to go after that? You know? I went looking for a photo to illustrate this. I found this photo. This poor girl looks so sad and pathetic. She's just sitting there all dressed up in her nice dress, and nobody to talk to, nowhere to go. The photo just wiped me out when I saw it, because that was exactly what I was looking for. So even if you were capable of transferring from your wheelchair into a car, or could be lifted in a car, what do you do with a wheelchair? You know, if you had a pickup truck, you could throw it in the back, but that's a fair weather solution at best. You know, just pray it doesn't rain. And you say, well, what about doctor's appointments? Well, heck, in those days, doctors made house calls. You know, so, and if you got really sick, you'd call an ambulance. You didn't go shopping, you didn't go to restaurants, didn't go to the movies, sporting events, concerts, didn't go to school, didn't go to libraries, museums, government buildings. Nobody cared about making such facilities accessible because there were no disabled people out in the world doing anything. So it was only after the invention of the E&J folding wheelchair that disabled people had to worry about accessibility. And once they got out in the world and found it was a hostile place, it was only then that they began demanding the rights to access. Now, the mobility and range of people in wheelchairs were enhanced by another invention. In 1953, Canadian inventor George Klein invented the first battery-powered motorized wheelchair in a program that was funded to help injured World War II veterans. And that design was adapted by E&J, and they began mass-producing power wheelchairs in the early 1960s. Now, the problem with that was the early power wheelchairs didn't fold up unless you did some disassembly, like removing the battery pack or something. But that problem was solved when the vans came along. Now, initially there were no wheelchair vans. Volkswagen didn't introduce the famous microbus until 1950, and they didn't become popular until the early 60s, and most of them look like the one in this photo. It probably had shag carpet and maybe a mattress in the back. So that wasn't much of a wheelchair van. Would have been a fun party bus, but wasn't much for accessibility. The Chevy Corvair Greenbrier was the first American-made passenger van, and it was introduced in 1961. And that photo is the one that my family bought in 1963. And it was handy because both of these vehicles were rear engine, so the floor was really low. And in fact, when I was young, when my dad would load me in the van, he could just tip my wheelchair back and get the front wheels up onto the van and then just hoist me up into it by himself. We built a ramp later, but it was pretty easy. And today's minivans, because they're front engine and front wheel drive, they're easy to equip with a ramp. Here's some photos of me in E&J wheelchairs. And in 1965, when I was 10 years old, the school, especially school that I attended, was donated a motorized E&J wheelchair. And they allowed me to use it even during the summer, as long as my parents agreed to maintain it. I'm going to show off there a picture of me and former Governor Edgar Whitcomb. I was in a program called Junior Achievement, where you start your own small business, and the governor came through and toured the facility. And of course, anytime a politician sees somebody in a wheelchair, they got to take a photo. So, while I really appreciated the freedom that the wheelchairs gave me, I never really thought about the impact it had on the entire disability community. And that got me thinking about assistive technology in a completely new way. I asked myself, how does the AT that we have today, the AT solutions that I use and that I develop, how does that affect disability rights? It was a real paradigm shift for me, and that's what I really want to share with you today. A different way of looking at assistive technology. I always thought of AT as something that I wanted or something I needed, but it's more than that. We have a right to assistive technology. We have a right to it. Now, wait a minute, Chris, that's a pretty bold statement. How do you have a right to assistive technology? It's because assistive technology is necessary to access our disability rights, that the AT itself is a right. And of course, when I'm talking about disability rights, I'm talking about civil rights. I'm talking about human rights, the ordinary rights that all of us as human beings, as citizens, deserve. So if we're going to talk about rights, let's look at our founding documents. The Declaration of Independence says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." My favorite part of that phrase is "among these," which means there are other God-given unalienable rights, not just the three that they list here. Our Constitution has a Bill of Rights. The First Amendment talks about freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. I think we also cherish our privacy as a right, even though sometimes the constitutional lawyers want to argue about whether there's a right to privacy in the Constitution. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But I think we all agree that we greatly value our right to privacy. So we're going to take a look at assistive technology and how it impacts our ability to exercise our rights. First of all, let's talk about life. Sometimes assistive technology keeps us alive. Now, I use a ventilator at night to help me breathe and to sleep well, but I'm not dependent on it and to live. I'm not really talking about medical devices. For me, the issue is, while I'm on the vent, I can't talk. So what if I need help in the middle of the night? If my lungs get congested, I need my trach suction, or I need help for any reason. That could be life or death. So I use AT to communicate. And I'm showing here the system I use while I'm on the ventilator. The photo shows 3 little push buttons that I hold in my right hand. And we nicknamed it the sling ring. That's after the device that Doctor Strange uses in the Marvel comics. It's a little 2-finger ring. My friend Jonathan gave it that nickname. It really made me mad. Not that he named it, it was that I didn't think of it myself. So it allows me to do Bluetooth switch control to operate my iPad. And then I can use that to message my roommates if I need something in the middle of the night. And if they don't happen to hear the buzz on their iPhone, if that doesn't wake them up, I can also do a long press on the buttons, and that sets off a really loud alarm. And that'll get them out of bed. My sister Carol's over here, she can attest to that. So then, when they come into my room, I use an AAC program called Cough Drop. It's an open source, very inexpensive AAC program on my iPad, and I've got it pre-programmed with different messages. Go ahead and click that video there. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it or not.
I want another cover. Everything is okay. Good night. See you in the morning.
So anyway, I've got several phrases pre-programmed. You know, I want the covers off, covers on, need a suction, whatever. So lots of people use assistive technology in life-critical applications. And that really presents a problem for people like me and Bill who create custom AT solutions, because we determined we can't make AT devices for life-critical applications. And that's because no matter how carefully we design and build the products, if one of them fails, causing injury or even death, we would be liable under product liability laws. And so we always recommend that you use commercially available devices for life-critical applications. And you know, liability insurance is really expensive. And in some ways, I think that contributes to the high cost of commercially available devices. The best that we can do is to try to provide backup, and we're trying to work on solutions like that. For example, we've found that people that use eye trackers, sometimes the device locks up. And we notice that when it does that, the infrared illumination shuts off. And so we're trying to build a gadget that when the infrared light turns off, it sets off an alarm, and then that would alert your caregiver, hey, you need to come in and reboot the system. Go ahead. So another example, in 2016, I was in the hospital with pneumonia, and that eventually led to me getting my trach. And while I was on the ventilator, and before they got my speech valve, communication was a real challenge. I tried pointing at a communication board, but that didn't really work. You know, I don't have use of my hands. I put a straw in my mouth and tried to point at the thing with the straw. That didn't work. So my main means of communication was using that sling ring buttons connected to a device I call my ultimate remote control. And at home, I use it to control my TV, my cable box, my Blu-ray player, move the mouse on my computer. Right now I'm using it to scroll through my script so I can see what I'm saying here. So anyway, that gave me the ability to type messages with the Notepad app on my iPhone. And I could communicate with the doctors and the nurses. You just plug the AT buttons into it. It's got a little screen on the front, and then it's got infrared transmitter. Anyway, so I would type messages on my iPhone for the doctors or nurses. Giving a person a voice that they can express independently of their caregivers can be a real safety issue. You know, we're talking life or death. What if a person's being neglected or abused? You know, if you give them assistive technology that lets them speak or have access to the internet, then they can reach out for help to relieve such a situation. Now, I've been really fortunate. I've never been in that kind of situation. I've had wonderful friends and families and talented professionals that take really good care of me. But when I'm on that ventilator, I really feel my most vulnerable, and I feel that blessing even more so. Now, I'm very hands-on when it comes to my healthcare decisions. It was frustrating in the hospital when people were making decisions without my input or my consent. And this assistive technology gave me the liberty of self-determination on my healthcare decisions. I found that when I couldn't communicate, they treated me a lot different than when I could. I was really surprised at that. Even when I was able to give little simple yes or no answers, if I couldn't explain or, argue with them over the decision, they would ignore what I wanted. By the way, because I can't shake my head, I came up with a system. If I want to say yes, I wiggle my eyebrows up and down. And if I want to say no, I twitch my mouth left and right. And you might find that useful for some of your clients. And even if the nurse didn't know that was my system, they could sort of figure it out. A vertical motion meant yes, and a horizontal motion meant no. And, if you have like one blink for yes or two blinks for no, what if you don't know the system? So anyway.
So just to interrupt you.
Yeah.
So when he got out of that, he wrote a really good long series of blog posts about his experience in the hospital.
You're jumping the gun.
Oh,
I'm going to tell that.
all right.
You didn't think I was going to give up a chance
I know.
to promote my
All right, never mind.
blog, did you?
Never mind. All right, I'll shut up now.
Next slide, please.
Next slide, please.
Move
You've
on.
got a button that can do this.
I'm using my button for scrolling through my thing.
All right, I'll shut up.
Follow the script, Bill. So anyway, in my frustration over my inability to communicate, I texted a prayer request to a friend of mine. I said, pray that they listen to the man with no voice. And after I sent that, I reread it, and it kind of shocked me how stark it was. You know, I said that. That's what I'm feeling. It really kind of blew me away when I realized how desperate I felt. And so that particular quote really kind of brings together a lot of what we're talking about. You know, give people a voice. Without a voice, we're powerless. So now here we come. That sentence became the title of a series of blog posts. And you can read those blog posts at the QR code on the screen. You okay now, Bill?
Yeah, you can.
All right.
I was supposed to read this, wasn't I?
Yeah, you're supposed to. So, anyway, when I texted that prayer request to my friend, that brings up the issue of freedom of religion. So it wasn't just that I was submitting prayer requests, but I also wrote a message to the nurse to ask her to have the hospital chaplain come by, because I wanted to be anointed by the priest. Now, in times past, you didn't call for the priest unless you were dying. But these days they don't call it last rites anymore. The Catholic term is sacrament of the anointing of the sick. And you can ask for the priest to come anoint you anytime you're in a chronic disease or health crisis. You don't have to be on your deathbed. And even though I wasn't on my deathbed, you know, you lay there and you're sick and you start thinking things over, and there were some things that were burdening me, and I wanted to go to confession. So I typed out my confession on my iPhone in advance, and when the priest came in, I had him read it, and then of course I deleted it afterwards. And then I deleted the cloud backup, and then I emptied the trash in the cloud backup. So here's another example of using AT in a religious context. I want to tell you about a young friend, Max. He's 9 years old, and he has a more severe form of SMA than what I have. And his muscles are so weak that his speech is difficult for him, difficult for me too. So his father explained to me that their family worships as Messianic Jews. They're a family of Jewish descent who affirm and embrace Christian beliefs about Jesus, and they continue to celebrate and pray in Jewish traditions. So Max uses his AAC to learn Hebrew words and letters. And if you notice, I don't know if you can see on that screen, there's Hebrew text on his AAC. So he expresses his knowledge of his faith to articulate his own understanding. And then, for example, at Passover, the youngest child is given the job of asking 4 questions about why we celebrate the Passover and how we celebrate it. And so Max uses his AAC to participate in that ceremony every year. And his parents hope that in a few years he'll use the AAC programmed in Hebrew at his bar mitzvah. So assistive technology enables our freedom to worship. Let's talk about the Second Amendment. Last year in our presentation, we told the story about Michael Phillips, who was 37 years old with type 1 SMA. And on his website, he had a list of things he wanted to do. He didn't want to call it a bucket list, but essentially that's what it was. And among the things listed was things like spend the night on the beach with a beautiful woman. Yeah. Now, for our purposes, that would, excuse me. Yeah. For that purposes, that would qualify as pursuit of happiness. But Bill pointed out he can't make that happen. You know, if Bill could, yeah. If Bill could get a night on the beach with a woman, I'd been second in line right behind Mike. But anyway, among other things, Mike wanted to go to a gun range and fire a gun. And Bill said, I can help you with that. So he got cooperation from a lot of different people. He got a company that manufactures a gun-holding vise, you know, that they use for test firing. And he got them to loan him one of those. He got cooperation from the people at the gun range. And he even got special permission from the ATF.
You're not allowed to automate.
Yeah. So using a secure web page over a private network so nobody could hack it.
Yeah, it was not on the internet.
Yeah. Mike was able to use his assistive technology to trigger the device and fire a handgun, and you can see there he was shooting a target that looked like a zombie. And they had quite a time there. Bill, you want to talk about that for just a minute? Or?
So I think if you haven't seen that, so this is the QR code worth watching later.
Yeah.
And it is, I know that you know this. So Mike and his family is very left, very, very left wing. She has healthcare voter tattooed on her hand, right? So she's as far left as you go, and that's her quote, right? And I'm like, why are you here, right? So she pulled up in a white minivan with Mike in the back, and on the back it said "F Trump" on the bumper sticker at the gun range. And I'm like, okay, here we go. All right, this is why we play the game, right? It was one of these days that was really remarkable because like everybody got it. Like she's not gonna. Mike wants to fire a gun. Mike doesn't want to shoot anybody. He wants to fire a gun. He's a grown man. He has the right to do this, right? He wants to exercise it. The guys at the gun range cleared the range on a Saturday. There's like, doesn't happen. Anybody here who goes to the gun range, they don't clear the range. Right? They cleared the range. And everybody there set aside politics for about 3 hours. Nobody on Twitter and anywhere else that saw the video and commented put aside politics. I had people saying, "You're making another murderer." I'm like, "I'm not that good. I'm not that good. I can't make him a murderer." And people on the left, you know, but on the right, they're like, "Why are you giving her a platform?" Because one thing I did at the end of this video is that Karen, his mom, gave a talk about why she was doing this and how she doesn't believe in this at all. Right? She doesn't believe in guns. She believes they're wrong, but it's his life. And her life as caregiver isn't to guide him in ways that corral him. It's to make things possible. So it's a great video. It makes you feel better. And I wish I didn't get all the weird backlash that I've gotten from it. Because I think when we're not online, we're all kind of okay, right? And everybody was, I'm like, I had people on as far apart as they could be. Yeah, all right, this guy wants to fire a gun. Let's go do that. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I wanted you could explain that with more passion than I could because I wasn't there. And
you would have been with Karen.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm okay. I think it's great. You know, I play video games and blow things up. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So, you know, and you got a right to do it. Do it.
Right.
Okay. So, also in the same way that the lightweight foldable wheelchairs opened up access to urban areas, now they're producing all-terrain wheelchairs with treads, like the one shown there on the screen. And that opens up outdoor sporting activities for disabled people, including things like hunting. So it's, you know, you can go out, hunt in the woods. You know, even if you get paralyzed or something, still got good use of your arms. Now, I don't know if you can mount a gun on the armrest of your wheelchair, but who knows?
Might not be good this week.
No,
Right.
no. So you can purchase these wheelchairs, and some state parks and other facilities even have them available to rent, which I think is great. There's chairs for water sports. We got a photo there of somebody from Camp Riley down in Martinsville using a water chair to ski. And my dad built me a floating lawn chair that had a little electric motor on it. And we had a place on Cordley Lake down in Brown County. And I could kind of scoot around our boat dock area and stuff. And of course, winter sports are opening up to disabled people. And skiing and those kinds of things are in the Paralympics. So again, the wheelchair device design has evolved to allow more opportunities for disabled people to pursue their happiness. Talk a little bit more about pursuit of happiness. Of course, assistive technology gives us opportunities for computer and video games. And Bill invented the device on the upper right there, appropriately called the Freedom Wing. And it allows you to connect a standard wheelchair joystick to a microcontroller called an Adafruit Feather. And then you can program that microcontroller for all sorts of things. Originally, he designed it to connect to an Xbox adaptive controller for gaming, but we've done other things with it. Bill and I used it to fly a drone around my house. You can see an aerial photograph of me there, and that code will take you to that video. For 50 years, I dreamed about flying radio-controlled airplanes, but I can't move my head around, so I couldn't see where I was flying. But these days, the drones have onboard cameras, and you put on a pair of goggles, and it's like you're sitting on the drone flying around. So that was a blast. Then I also adapted the Freedom Wing to be used as a computer mouse. And even though my Ultimate Remote and my voice control software allows you to move the mouse, it's not very quick. So using the wheelchair joystick to move the mouse quickly in a more natural way makes it really more productive on my computer for a lot of things. Like I can operate CAD software to design 3D printed devices. It makes it easier for me to edit videos and to do my podcast. But the biggest way that I use it is to pursue happiness. I'm addicted to a computer game. I play
that's not questionable.
Yeah. Bill messaged me, I can't talk right now, I'm in a fleet, So I joined up with my friends in a game called EVE Online.
Anybody here play EVE?
We fly virtual spaceships around in fleets, and we shoot up bad guys. And I've even gotten to the level where I'm a fleet commander, which means I'm in charge of about a dozen people, and we go out on missions and fly together. And it allows me to compete on a level playing field. If I hadn't told them I had a disability, I don't think they would know. So that sort of leads us to another freedom of assembly. It's fun to go around and blow things up in my little spaceship, but the real enjoyment comes from belonging to that community. And we get on voice chat using a Discord, and we joke around and everything. I made friends from all over the U.S., Netherlands, England, Germany, Italy, Poland, and India, just to name a few. Now, having access to the internet also gives you the freedom to associate with like-minded people. I belong to at least 5 different support groups for people with SMA and other neuromuscular diseases. And I never met another person with SMA until about 8 years ago, when I met some online. So I've learned a lot from them. My parents were told I wasn't going to live very long when I was young. And even though the doctors know much more about my disease than they did in those days, it's really great relief for these parents that come on there and they meet me, and I'm 67 years old and still alive and kicking. Now, I gotta admit, I'm the oldest SMA person I met online, but hey, I know lots of other people in their 50s and 60s, and I'm still doing it, so it gives them a lot of hope. Also, my work with Bill at AT Makers wouldn't be possible without easy access to the internet. I'm also enrolled in an online writing seminar with a famous science fiction author, David Gerald. And he's introduced me to a lot of other talented writers, and I've learned a lot from them. So we hear a lot about the negative use of the internet, but there are positive opportunities to interact with like-minded people, whether it's politics, religion, fandom of your favorite franchise, or all sorts of activities. Let's talk about freedom of speech and freedom of the press. As I mentioned, I love to write. I wrote a book about computer graphics. I've had a couple of autobiographical articles published in Indianapolis Monthly. I do technical writing. But let me talk about somebody else. I talk about myself too much. This is a photo from the early 1980s of me and my friend Christopher Lee. And he was a freelance journalist and a playwright. And Christopher had very severe cerebral palsy, and his spasms were so severe that he would keep his hands strapped down to the armrest of his wheelchair so they wouldn't fly around. That was more comfortable for him than having his arms fly all over the place. And even though he could talk a little bit, only his family and close friends could understand him. And I could follow him sometimes as long as I knew what the topic was. If you change the topic on me, I get lost really quick. And I'm sure there are plenty of speech and hearing people in the audience, and you know that experience. So anyway, for years he struggled some way to activate a switch. He couldn't push a button. He didn't have any way to activate a device. It's what Bill and I call digitizing intent. You know, there's something inside him that we need to get out. And we need to get in a digital form of an on-off switch. And then we can leverage that to do all sorts of things. In those days, speech recognition was still a dream. I don't think anybody even dreamed of something like eye tracking back in the 1980s. If you'd asked me, I would never see speech recognition in my lifetime back in those days. And now I'm completely dependent on it.
And proficient.
Yeah.
Insanely proficient. Right.
So anyway, finally Christopher figured out he could make a clicking sound with his tongue, like that. So he had a friend who was an electrical engineering student, and they analyzed his click sound and figured out what pitch it was. And he built a little circuit that would pick up that sound with a microphone, and it would filter out ordinary speech and room noise, and it would only trigger when it heard a sharp, loud sound at that particular pitch. And so then they connected that to a little relay, and he could control a tape recorder. And so he'd do 1 click for stop, 2 clicks for play, 3 for fast forward, 4 for rewind, and 5 for record. So he could dictate into the tape recorder and have some ability to play it back and maybe erase over or do it again. And then his mother would listen to the tapes and transcribe it for him whenever she had a chance. And so he used that system to write a couple of articles for the local Brown County newspaper. So there you go. AT gave him freedom of the press. So when I learned about that, I said, well, now that we know how to get something out of you, how would you like to type on a computer? And you didn't need to understand his speech very well to hear the big yes. Okay. And then the next question, how? So I wrote up a little demo program and showed him how we would scan the alphabet, and then he would click and it would enter that into the computer. So he gave me a schematic for his gadget, and I built one, and we got Voc Rehab to buy him a computer, and I wrote the software, and they paid me for it, which was nice. And it would display 64 symbols across the top of the screen. They include the alphabet, punctuation marks, and some multi-character combinations like ED, ING, ST, stuff like that. And it would scan along in groups of 16, and then he would click, and then it would scan in groups of 4, and then he would click, and then he would click click again. So with 3 clicks, he could pick 1 out of 64 symbols. And it was pretty slick. We entered the design in something called the Johns Hopkins National Search for Computer Applications for the Handicapped. And I went up to Chicago and exhibited it, and we earned 7th place, making it one of the top 100 entries in the country. Now, in those days, computers were all completely text-based. There was no mouse, and there was very limited graphics. But he could do anything that you could do with a keyboard. Go to the next slide there. He wrote a script for a video for school-age children called Always a Chance for a Change. And it was a puppet show with some live-action people, me. It was all about disability inclusion and awareness. And it was shown to children all over the state. And it's available on YouTube. And in it, you'll see a much younger version of me in the video. Don't expect any Oscar-worthy performance. I'm a terrible actor. But here's a little, go ahead and click that video. Here's a little excerpt that explains how his device worked.
When Christopher Lee writes a story or a play, he doesn't use a pencil or a pen. He uses a computer. The computer has a program called a word processor, which lets an author type, edit, correct, and print words. Most people use computers by typing on a keyboard, but Christopher can't type. His computer has been specially programmed to make use of his abilities. It shows all of the letters of the alphabet and some punctuation marks at the top of the TV display. The computer lights up sections of the alphabet one at a time. When the section Christopher wants is lit up, he makes a click with his tongue. After clicking 3 times, the computer knows what Christopher wants to type. Anything that can be done on a keyboard, he can do by clicking his tongue. When he gets the story looking just like he wants it, he clicks a command to the computer and it types the final copy on paper.
So anyway, that's 80s technology there.
None of these people were born.
Yeah, so some of them were.
We won't point them out.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So that brings us to a need for privacy. You know, we hear a lot about internet privacy. People value their personal information, the right to view what they want without any interference or repercussions. We need the ability to write what we want and only share it with the people we choose. Assistive technology gives you the independence to do these things without outside interference or assistance. Now, we already talked about the safety issue of being able to correspond in case of abuse, but there are other times that we want to maintain our privacy. Now, like that script that Christopher wrote, he co-produced that video with his mother, and so it didn't matter that she was involved in it. But there were other things that he wrote that were much more personal. It allowed him to keep a private journal. And he was able to put down in words the kind of things you don't want to dictate to your mother. You know, you need freedom of privacy. Now, I mentioned I was in an online writing seminar. My homework 2 weeks ago was write a sex scene. Okay? Unfortunately, my pet ate my homework. Okay, so I didn't get it done. But I do happen to know that among the other things, Christopher experimented to express his creativity by writing erotic fantasies. Now, that's not the kind of thing you want to dictate onto a tape that's maybe out of your control, and certainly not something you want your mom to transcribe. Now, even though this was before the internet, services like AOL and CompuServe allowed you to have GIF images that we still use today. CompuServe invented the GIF format. And it might take a couple of minutes to download one picture, but at least you could do it. Now, human nature being what it is, the minute we were able to transmit computer images, What did we use it for? Transmit erotica, okay? People were making X-rated content. Now, I don't know for sure what his viewing habits were, but he certainly had the capability of viewing such content online. What was his alternative? Ask somebody to buy him a magazine and prop it up in front of him? He's not going to do that. So it might be embarrassing to talk about these things, but why should it be? You know, disabled people are human beings. We have the same wants and needs and desires as anybody else. And disabled people are using assistive technology to express themselves as sexual beings in a variety of ways. Now, these first two images are from the Instagram page of Chelsea Hill. She's the founder of a famous wheelchair dance troupe called the Rolettes. And you might have seen her a few years ago on a reality TV show called Push Girls that was about a group of disabled women that were friends. And she's just one of several disabled women I've seen recently on social media proudly posting glamour photos of themselves pregnant. And you can see the happy couple there when she finally delivered. There's another couple. They're having an outdoor wedding using one of those all-terrain wheelchairs. So these people are celebrating themselves as sexually active, happy, normal people who are participating in the miracle of parenthood. Disabled people express their sexuality in a variety of ways, whether it's writing, posting glamour photos, and even submitting homemade videos to erotic websites. Assistive technology is giving them the ability to express themselves as healthy, whole people living happy, fulfilling lives. So I told you we were looking at AT in areas you might not have thought of. I think we did that. But the pursuit of happiness is a right, and assistive technology unlocks that right. Now, it's not just adults who need privacy. Kids also need privacy, and it comes in much simpler forms. And this is a project we talked about last year. This is a teenage girl named Kylie who has cerebral palsy, and she wanted privacy in her room. You know, her pets were annoying her, and maybe she wanted to text her girlfriends about some cute boy she met without anybody looking over her shoulder. So Bill designed a Wi-Fi connected device she could use to open and close her bedroom door using her eye tracker. Now her case brings up another issue. Unfortunately, when we designed the device, we didn't think about designing a way to easily change the Wi-Fi password. Yeah, I'll say we. It's the royal we. So when they got a new internet router, it didn't work anymore. Now, Bill could have found somebody to reconfigure it, or he might have been able to talk him through it over Zoom, or he travels through that area occasionally. The problem was, we didn't know it quit working. And they were reluctant to contact us to find out how to change it. And we've had other clients who needed follow-up changes, and they were reluctant to bother us with it. They thought of the device as something nice that they wanted. She lived without before. She could live without later. That door opener device protected her right to privacy. She had a right to that device, but she didn't look at it that way. Now, there might be other instances where you're evaluating a client and they may have the attitude, well, I don't really need all these gadgets, or they don't think they're worthy of all the effort that you're putting into getting them these devices, especially if it's a difficult case. So, Bill always says, when you make a presentation, what do you want people to take away? Here's what I want you to remember. Assistive technology allows us to exercise our rights. We need to have that kind of intense enthusiasm for providing these solutions. And we need to instill in the clients that they have a right to these devices. You know, it's fun to play online games But if you need to report neglect or abuse, it's not about fun and games anymore. When you want to express yourself through speech or writing or religion or your friendship with others, it's not just the basic need to communicate. It's about your human rights. So if you're trying to get funding for devices, it's not about what the client wants or what they need. People dispute, oh, they don't really need that. Tell them it's about their rights. Now, I don't know if that strategy will work or not, but I'm going to ask you to give it a try. And if you get resistance from your administrators or your funding sources or even the clients themselves, try approaching AT from a human rights perspective. It might take you some places you didn't expect it was going to go, like we've shown today. Now, I seriously doubt you go to your funding source and say, my client needs AT so they can access X-rated material online. I don't think that's not going to work. But then again, why not? If you have a right to do it, why should the disability get in the way? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that means disabled people too. But hey, that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. If you'd like more info about any of the AT solutions or have any questions about custom AT, please join us on Facebook, and we'd love to have you.
Email.
Huh?
You left my slide. It's got my email on there. They're all going to bother me about your porn.
Well, forward it to me.
So I'll be happy to forward any messages to Chris.
Yeah.
Here,
Carol, you want to grab my cards? Yeah.
There's cards.
Yeah. So I also mentioned that I have a podcast I started around the first of the year. It's called Contemplating Life. And I describe it as dealing with disability, religion, politics, entertainment, and anything else I feel like talking about. Now, the first 5 episodes are all disability related. I express some rather strong opinions about things like ableism and inspiration and things like that. And then the most recent episode, I go back to disability topics, and I talk about my experiences in the special ed school that I went to growing up. So I think that would be of interest to you. So my sister's passing out my card over here, and it's got the podcast information on one side, it's got my email on the other side, so you don't have to bug Bill. And the podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all the podcast platforms, and it's free to listen everywhere. If you want to, I do have a Patreon page. You can subscribe. It gets you early access. And like I said, I'm not trying to get rich, but it's a way you can show your support if you like what I'm doing. And today, I'll probably put this video up either on the podcast or just on my YouTube channel. So that's it. If you got any questions, comments, any feedback, I would welcome it. And thank you so much for coming out. And it's been fun. Questions? Thank you.
All right. Look at that.
Okay.